퇴직연금 하나은행으로 미션 클리어!
지금처럼 인생의 행복을 이어나가고 싶은 한 분 한 분의 마음 평생 지켜드리고 싶어요. 손님의 소중한 연금도 하나은행이 평생 지켜드릴게요. 내가 받는 연금도 하나은행. 믿을 수 있는 내 편은 하나.
있잖아, 난 연금 같은 건 잘 몰라.
Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to day 4 keynote speaker session. And my name is Byung-Yong Son, Professor of English Education at Gyeongnam University and General Secretary of the Korean Association of East-West Comparative Literature. Before we begin, please silence your devices. And the lecture will run about 9:30 or 40. And followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. For question, please raise your hand for a microphone and keep your question concise so we can include as many voices as possible. Right. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Nijen Zhao, professor at Guangdong University of Foreign Studies and the president of the International Association for Ethical Literary Criticism. As the Congress pamphlet notes, Nee's work on ethical literary criticism opens new pathways for understanding literature's moral and cultural responsibilities. Today's lecture is titled Oral Literature and the Cognitive Principles of Brain Text. And please join me in welcoming Professor Nee.
Dear moderator, respected scholars and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great honor for me to deliver this keynote speech at such a distinguished conference. This morning, I would like to share with you some reflections on oral literature, a topic that inevitably involves not only involves not only oral literature, but also the concepts of text and language, particularly what I refer to as the brain text. I will begin with the first part of my talk, which will discuss a fundamental question: what is oral literature? This question serves as the point of departure for my presentation, in which I will explore the definition and the distinctive features of oral literature as a basic for further discussion on brain text and language. To begin our inquiry, we must first ask a fundamental question: what is oral literature? Oral literature refers to literary expression whose primary mode of creation, transmission, and reception is spoken language. It is the verbal articulation of literary thought, stories, ideas, and emotions conveyed through the living medium of speech. Unlike written literature, oral literature lacks material tangibility. It can't be seen or heard as a physical object, and yet it possesses what we might meaningfully call text, not in the usual graphic-centric sense of visible inscription, but as a cognitive construct that exists in the mind of performers. In essence, oral literature is a composition remembered and realized in performance. It lives in memory, it retrieved through mental effort, and comes to life in the act of vocal expression. Scholars widely agree that oral literature long predates writing as the dominant of literary communication in human societies. It appeared in myths, epics, legends, and folk songs, works passed down orally from generation to generation. In contrast to the written tradition, which is often linked to the individual's authorship. Oral literature typically is from communal traditions and collective cultural practice. Any narrative or poetic work conceived and transmitted through the speech falls within the dominant. Importantly, oral traditions didn't vanish with the invention of writing. Even in today's world, they persist in jokes, props, rhymes, and informal storytelling. Scholars often define oral literature in contrast to written literature and distinguish between two prime types. First, primary orality, works created and passed down entirely through speech in non-literary societies. For example, fundamental myths, heroic epics, and ancestral legends. Second, transcribed orality, works that originated in oral form but were eventually written down, such as ballads, folk tales, and humorous narratives. This distinction, however, is fluid. Many canonical works, such as the Iliad and Beowulf, originated in oral traditions but have reached us in written form, dominating the deep interdependence between oral and written modes. It is sometimes said that the essence of oral literature lies in its use of sound, but this, I suggest, is a theoretical misunderstanding. Sound, by itself, is meaningless. It is the carrier of language, not its content. What gives oral literature its meaning is structured language, language shaped by intention, incapable of conveying thought and emotion. Literature don't simply hear sound, they hear language in sound. Vocal performance is merely the audible surface. It is language, not sound alone, that gives oral literature its substance. This leads to crucial insight. The defining feature of oral literature is not its audibility, but grounding in spoken language. Pre-literate societies didn't communicate with sound in the abstract. They communicated through language, through meaningful, patterned sound, symbol systems capable of expressing complex ideas and shared memory. When we listen to oral literature, we are not just hearing acoustics, we are engaging with verbal forms that carry cultural meaning. We might express the relationship this way. First, sound expresses language, and language conveys oral literature. This brings us to a fundamental ontological question. If oral literature carried by language rather than by sound alone, what constitutes its form? For written literature, form is materially visible in the graphic text. But in oral literature, what serves as the equivalent of form? Could be considered its form. That seems unsatisfactory. Sound is fleeting, unstructured, and impermanent. Can language be its form? That too is communicated. Language is the medium, not form. It is intangible, dynamic, and deeply dependent on memory and performance. It lacks the visual stability we typically associate with literary form. As Wellick and Warren argued, oral literature is not only legitimate but essential to comparative literary studies. And yet, key questions remain. First, what is the logical substance of oral literature? I think it is brain text. Second, so through what mechanisms is it preserved and passed down? I think they are sound and language. Historical evidence suggests that early human cultures preserved knowledge means songs, genealogies, rituals, not through writing, but through repeated oral performance. The invention of writing allowed for the material stabilization of these works. When oral compositions were transcribed, their modality changed. They became written literature. What we know of ancient and oral traditions today comes mostly through such written remnants. The living performances of primary orality have largely vanished. Once the storytellers and the singers passed away, so too did their compositions, unless they were recorded in writing. Take Homer, for example. His epics were performed orally for generations before they were ever written down. What we now read as the Iliad and the Odyssey are not oral events. They are written texts. Their survival depended entirely on transcription. From the standpoint of literary materiality, pure oral literature in its original performative form no longer exists. What remains are textual scholars of voices that once lived in sound, and yet the historical truth and the creative vitality of oral literature remain undeniable. Beyond the canonical figures like Homer, countless unnamed poets, singers, and storytellers shape the cultural imagination of humanity. Many of them not simply because their words were never written down. Let's now turn to a deeper question. If oral literature lacks a fixed material form, then what precisely is its text? And where does that text reside? If there is no written text, what serves as the textual foundation of oral literature? Now, I will go on to the second part of my talk. Does oral literature have a text? If we acknowledge the historical reality of oral literature, we are immediately confronted with a fundamental question. Before the invention of writing systems, how was oral literature transmitted from one generation to the next? Was it passed down through some form of text akin to written literature? Or does oral literature, by its very nature, lack a textual basis altogether? These questions demand careful attention, for they go to the heart of what we mean by literature and how it is transmitted. By definition, written literature depends on material texts. visible, stable science fixed on the surface. The written text allows literature to persist over time and across space. It can be said, reread, analyzed, and archived. But what sustains the existence of oral literature? A common answer is sound. Since oral literature is spoken aloud and received by the ear, it is often assumed that sound is its medium. At the first glance, this seems reasonable, but this assumption conflates vocalization with preservation. Sound is audible, intangible. It exists only in the moment, vanishing the instant the speaker falls silent. While sound may be the immediate medium of performance, it can't serve as a lasting medium of oral literature. The confusion arises from a category mistake, confusing acoustic expression with linguistic substance. Some might interpret different sounds as conveying different meanings, much like letters in writing. But this language, a structured system of science, governed by rules and patterns, sound is merely the physical carrier. What listener apprehends is not raw auditory signal, but an linguistic form embedded within it. Therefore, the true medium of oral literature is not sound alone, but spoken language shaped and transmitted through sound. Oral literature is not visual or graphic. It is apprehended through hearing. The speaker produces linguistic utterances through vocal sound, which travels as vibrations in the air and is decoded by the listener's auditory system. But what is understood is not the vibration. It is the language shaped within that vibration. Elements like pitch, tone, and rhythm add expressive nuance, but language. Before the advent of sound recording, even the most powerful speech disappeared as soon as it was uttered. Only with the development of writing did the language gain the capacity for material permanence. Still, neither sound nor speech alone constitutes a text in the conventional sense. This distinction is essential. Sound is ephemeral. Without recording, it vanishes. Spoken language, too, is fleeting. It lives in memory of performers. To equate sound with text is to misunderstanding the nature of oral literature. Sound, when unstructured, carries no meaning. It is only when sound becomes language that it begins to signify. In this sense, I think sound delivers language, and language conveys literature. Sound is the vessel, language is the medium, and the literature is the sound, the meaning. From the standpoint of literary theory, and particularly from the perspective of ethical literary criticism, literature can't exist without a text. A text is the necessary form that makes literature preservable, interpretable, and communicable. Whether written or oral, literature must have a textual foundation to endure and to recognize as literature. Without a text, there can be no stable structure, no continuity, no identity of the work. The oral literature relies on the existence of an internal text, remembered structure encoded in the performer's mind. This internalized text allows different tellers in different times and places to recount the same story with recognizable coherence. Without such a mental framework, oral literature would dissolve into improvisation. But what is remembered is not just a string of sound. It is the texture form of the story, its characters, events, rhythm, structure, and meaning. Thus, in oral literature, what is transmitted is not only the performance, but the text behind the performance. This text is not inscribed on paper, but it is real. It exists in memory, shared among the performers and the communities, passed down across generations. It is what we may call the brain text, a mental structure that preserves the work and makes the performance possible. The existence of such brain text confirms that oral literature does, in fact, have a text. These texts are not written, but they are structured, durable, and transmissible. They serve the same function as written texts. They preserved the identity and the integrity of the literary work. Without them, oral literature would vanish the moment it is spoken. We often associate word text with writing, but this is limited view. A text, at its core, is a structured body of language that conveys meaning. Writing is only one way to stabilize that structure. In oral traditions, structure is stabilized in memory and enacted in performance. The text still exists. It simply resides in the mind rather than on the page. We may now return to our original question with a revised understanding. Yes, oral literature doesn't have a text. It is not written but remembered. It is not fixed in ink but formed in the brain. It is the brain text, language structured in memory and transmitted through performers. Without this internal text, oral literature would dissolve into fragments. With it, oral literature becomes durable, meaningful, and enduring, truly literature. If we accept that oral literature possesses a text, not a written one, but a mental, internalized structure preserved in memory, then we are led to a deeper question. What exactly is this internal text? How is it formed, retained, and transmitted in the absence of writing? What are its characteristics, and how does it function within the act of oral performance? To answer these questions, we must turn our attention to the concept of the brain text, the keyword in my keynote, a term that refers to the cognitive form of literature stored and processed within the human mind. It is this brain-based text that analyzes the creation, transmission, and the reception of oral literature. Understanding the brain text allows us to move beyond the limitations of written-centered literary theory and to rethink the very foundation of what constitutes a text. Now, let's explore this question in the third part of my talk. What is the brain text? Before any literary work is written or typed, before it can be printed on paper or encoded as digital data, it must first exist in the mind. Every poem, novel, or philosophical argument originates as the mental construct, a form of internal composition that precedes all material inscription. We refer to this cognitive and pre-verbal form as the brain text. This concept is essential not only for understanding oral literature, but also for recognizing the foundational role of cognition in all literary production and transmission. A brain text refers to a biologically instantiated form of a text stored and processed within the human neurocognitive system. It is generated through perception, memory, cognition, and conceptual organization. While it doesn't appear on paper or screen, it is no less real. The brain text represents the earliest form of textual existence, a non-material internal structure that holds literary content in the form of semantic memory and mental schemata. Unlike written text, which consists of visible symbols on a physical medium or digital texts, which encode information in binary form, the brain text is embedded in neural architecture and expressed through speech of action. Cognition begins with perception, visual, auditory, tactile, or otherwise. However, the brain doesn't retain raw stimuli. Instead, it transforms them into symbolic representations, which are then encoded in memory. These mental structures, organized as narrative sequences, poetic patterns, or conceptual frameworks, form the basis of brain texts. In pre-literate societies, the brain text functioned as the sole medium of literary storage and transmission. Poets, storytellers, and bards committed entire epics and genealogies to memory, not through writing, but through the internalization of structured linguistic and cultural knowledge. The brain text is defined not only by its content, but by its biological medium. It is composed of electrochemical activity and neural connectivity. Its formation follows a sequence. Perception leads to symbolic encoding. Encoding triggers memory storage. Stored memory enables expressive output. This mirrors the functioning of computational systems in which data input is processed and transformed into output. In this analogy, the brain is the hardware and the brain text is the software in it runs. In literary contexts, the brain assimilates experience, emotion, and social interaction. It conveys this into symbolic structures, narrative arcs, metrical lines, or argumentative forms, and stores them as brain texts. During oral performance, this internal text is retrieved and vocalized. The listener, in turn, decodes the spoken language and reconstructs a new brain text within their own mind. This establishes a cyclical process of generation, transmission, and reception. The brain text is especially critical in understanding oral literature. In oral cultures, spoken words are merely the surface. Beneath them lies a structured mental form, memorized, organized, and repeatable. The rhapsodes of ancient Greece, West African griots, and medieval European minstrels all relied on brain text for their performance. They were not improvising extemporaneously. They were activating complex internal blueprints for narrative, rhythm, and meaning. Yet brain texts are inherently vulnerable, unlike written or digital texts, which can be preserved indefinitely through reproduction. Brain texts depend solely on human memory. They are subject to aging, illness, trauma, and forgetting. They are not genetically inherited and can only be transmitted through communicative acts, primarily oral performance. If not successfully passed on, they vanish. Many literary works have been lost to history because their brain texts were never transcribed. No brain text is ever reproduced with perfect fidelity. Memory is fallible, and every retrieval involves variations, whether accidental or intentional. Stories adapt to context, audience, and purpose. Therefore, oral literature is inherently fluid. Its identity doesn't lie in exact wording, but in recognizable structures, motifs, and themes that persist across versions. The brain text serves as a flexible framework, allowing continuity without demanding rigged replication. The brain text is not a set of data points. It is an evolving product of memory, experience, and culture. It embodies not only mental encoding, but also meaning as shaped by values, history, and community. These dimensions remain, for now, beyond the reach of machines. Despite its intangible form, the brain text offers a fundamental paradigm for comparative literary theory. It reminds us that literature begins not with the pen or keyboard, but with thought. All texts, whether oral, written, or digital, organize as internal cognitive structure. In oral cultures, the brain text is the only form in literate and digital cultures. It remains the invisible precursor to inscription. By foregrounding the brain text, we can move beyond the binary opposition of oral and written. We can focus instead on the deep continuity that underlies all forms of literary expression. The mind's capacity to generate, organize, and transmit meaning. The brain text is the silent origin of literature, the invisible text behind every voice, every page, and every green. And now, I will go to my last part, of my talk, the first part of my talk, the definition of language. Let's now return from the discussion of brain text to a more foundational question: what is language? How is it generated from brain text, and how does it in turn express them? Across disciplines, literature, linguistics, philosophy, history, and even the natural sciences, academic inquiry depends fundamentally on text. Yet language presupposes texts. Thus, the question, what is language, lies not only at the heart of linguistic studies, but also at the very foundation of literary theory. Without a clear and precise definition of language, our understanding of literature risks becoming an knockout. Since the 20th century, critical movements such as structuralism, formalism, and deconstruction have marked what is often referred to as the linguistic turn. Beneath these theoretical shifts lies a deeper concern: the nature of language itself. Defining language, therefore, is not a purely linguistic issue. It is a problem that reverberates throughout the entire humanities. Today, one of the most unsettled and consequential questions in language studies is: what exactly is language? Numerous definitions exist. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, language is a system of conventional spoken or written symbols for group communication. Henry Sweet defined it as the expression of ideas by means of speech sounds combined into words. Bloch and Traeger describe it as a system of arbitrary vocal symbols used by a social group to cooperate. While influential, these definitions remain incomplete and often vague. They describe the functions of language, but not its fundamental nature. Broadly speaking, two prevailing views dominate the field. One holds that language encompasses both speech and writing. The other, more restrictive, sees language as limited to spoken expression. In Chinese academic discourse, the debate often centers on whether writing is part of language or distinct phenomenon. Linguists may tolerate such ambiguity, but literary studies can't. The concept of literature depends on the definition of language. Misdefining it leads inevitably to misunderstanding literature itself. The problem is further complicated by metaphorical extensions of the term language. Phrases like animal language or machine language may be heuristically useful, but they shouldn't be confused with the core object of our inquiry, human language. I mean, the human language is different from animal language and machine language. At its simplest, the language might be described as meaningful sound produced through the human vocal system. But even this is insufficient. A more precise formulation, consistent with our earlier discussion of brain text, is this. Language is the sound-based actualization of brain text. In this view, language is not merely a communicative tool, but a dynamic process through which internal mental content is recorded, orderable, and shareable. Before the invention of sound recording technologies, language existed only as a real-time, ephemeral event produced by a speaker and heard by a listener. When the speaker stopped speaking or passed away, their language vanished with them. It was only through writing that language could be preserved beyond the moment of speech. This reveals a crucial ontological distinction. First is language is the oral and auditory expression of brain text. Second is writing is the visual and symbolic representations of brain text. Both are means of externalizing and transmitting thought, but they're not the same. Spoken language is so-called language, and it is immaterial and fleeting. But writing is material and enduring. This leads us to a more fundamental question. Where does language comes from? The answer lies in the concept of the brain text. Human thought, once cognitively processed and stored, assumes the form of internal mental structures, brain texts. These structures are not yet language, but they serve as its generative source. When the brain initiates speech, it accesses this internal brain text and sends motor instructions to vocal system. The organs of speech then produce sound shaped by the internal content. The resulting utterance is language. In this sense, language is not pre-existing. It emerges in real time as brain text is transformed into sound. This is the key point. In this sense, language is not pre-existing. It emerges in real time as brain text. Likewise, when we read or listen, the process is reversed. Written symbols are interpreted and cognitively reassembled into internal understanding. Spoken words are perceived and integrated back into brain text. Not every sound is language. Only those originating in brain text and conveying meaning can be considered truly literature. This insight has significant implications. It shows that language doesn't exist in advance of its articulation. There is no reservoir of language waiting to be used. Dictionaries and written texts are not language itself. They are records of or representations of language. Real language exists only in the moment it is spoken. It is not an object of one's own, but an event one performs. So I think I can conclude the definition of language. In conclusion, we may define language as the following terms. First, language is the sound-based actualization of brain text. Second, language is generated from cognitive content. Third, language exists only in the moment of articulation, brain text. Fourth, language is a real-time event, not a fixed object. Fifth, language is the audible expression of human thought. The sixth, language is transcendent, immaterial, and fundamentally dynamic. This foregoing constitutes the content of my presentation for today. I earnestly hope to engage in dialogue with all of you. Solicit your critical feedback and particularly invite discussions on the interactions of language, brain text, and oral literature after my presentation. Once again, I extend my sincere gratitude to all of you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes, I listened well from your illuminating and insightful lecture. But I feel sorry that because the time doesn't allow us to raise a question because we have another schedule. So thank you, and please join me again for thanking for Professor Lee's insightful lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Probably you can ask some question regarding of the lecture during our break time or whatever cases. And we will continue with the next session. This is the next keynote speaker is Professor Wenchin Ouyang in SOAS University of London. As the Congress pamphlet notes, Ouyang's scholarship connects Arabic literature with global literary currents, enriching comparative perspective across regions. Today's lecture is titled Shadow Theater, Ways of Seeing and Comparative Literature Toward Multilingualism as Method. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ouyang.
Oh, whoa, sorry. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be here and to share with you some of the ideas that I have been working on. I'm delighted to be able to also shed light on the importance of Arabic literature in comparative literature. Given that we are really short of time, what I'll try to do, and also given how complicated the topics I work on, I will sort of do a quick sort of presentation of what I have been up to using both reading from a text, but also a lot of visuals, right? And I'm sorry, I'm asking you to double task because I might not go over the slides very carefully, but these slides are meant to show you that whatever assertions I make in the coming 30 minutes are all substantiated. So I begin then with trepidation and annoyingly. The two conceptual categories, nation and language, inform not only contemporary language ideology and policy, but also reception of literary works, particularly in literary studies, whether within area studies, comparative literature, or word literature. Nation linked to state is imagined as sovereign territorial political community with roots in time immemorial, born in the age of modern imperialism and colonialism. Language is in turn standardized. Sorry about this. Language is in turn standardized and nationalized, both products of European knowledge traditions, and these are conceptualized as monolingual. Leeway, reflecting on language policy around the world in the 21st century in his quotes the way in which Tom Rincento in 2000 summarizes the intertwined monolingualized nation and language as one language, one people, one territory in the era of the post-colonial nation building in the 19th and 20th century, and one country, one nation, one language in both the post-colonial and postmodern eras in the 20th and 21st century. The sovereignty of nation and language underpins the imagined authenticity or identity, a literary work, genre, and tradition. It is manifested in how literary history is teleologically and monolingually narrated. In the Middle East, this led to forging a unitary nation and language from a pluralistic and multilingual society that obfuscates the plurality and multilingualism of Ottoman society, for example, according to Nerges Turk in her examination of the language ideology and policy in modern Turkey. The nationalization of the Ottoman literary canon, as Ceyhun, our son, demonstrates brilliantly, veils from view the multilingual Ottoman literary canon comprising literary works in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, to say the least, and the ways in which monolingualization of the monolingual Ottoman canon simultaneously gave rise to monolingual national Arabic and Persian literary histories. More importantly, the monolingualized sovereign nation and language underpins how we do comparative literature. Comparative literature began with the crystallization of the concept of a nation as monolingual. From the perspective of Arabic and Chinese literatures, comparative literature is about tracing the influence of European works on the non-European, always located in the modern period through the mastery of non-European authors through the mastery of non-European authors of the European national languages, such as English, French, and German, and their access to European literary works enabled by the mastery of European national languages and access to European national literary canons. It is not possible to read Arabic novel without reference to realism of Balzac and Dickens, or the postmodernism of Joyce and Proust, or the new novel of Alain Robbe-Grillet, or the magic realism of Garcia Marquez and Cortázar, both further traced to Franz Rohr in Germany, where literature celebrates the circulation of national literatures, particularly the novel, through translation into the international field normally located in Europe and North America. The dominance of the monolingual national in theory and practice of literary studies, comparative literature, and world literature has made it challenging to bring non-European literatures in conversation with each other. How can we, as comparatives, work our way around European modern, national, and monolingual frame of comparative literature and world literature, and make visible the historical cultural encounters and intercultural exchanges, not only between North and South and East and West, but also in the global South before and after globalization of European theories and practices. In my attempt to tinker with the existing paradigms for comparative literature and world literature in the context of my work on Arabic and Chinese comparative literature that tries to link the present with the past and the local with the global, I have reoriented my approach and method to the following. First, I adopt the Silk Roads and Spice Routes as a framework for inquiry. The Silk Roads comprise multiple centered networks of circulation, in my case, not just of genre and text, but above all of things, people, ideas, and ideologies and aesthetics. Two, I privilege multilingualism as method. Multilingualism describes our world, but also language itself. Language is inherently multilingual in two ways. First, each language embeds other languages through language contact, and second, it combines word, image, sound, and performance or body language, or how we use our body to communicate. And, right, I take a material turn in my close reading of literary texts in pursuit of signs of literary encounters and transformations in transformations. I have looked at coffee houses and tea houses, jade and silk, blue and white porcelain, which is on screen, for example, and through these trace the transformations of themes, genre, aesthetics, and in literary texts, right? One discovers interesting things when one takes such an approach to literary studies and comparative literature. Two are more immediately relevant to our topic today and to this meeting of the International Comparative Literature Association. Science, first, science and technology are integral to the revolution of literary language, text and genre, and transformation of aesthetics. And two, we tend to see multilingualism through a monolingual lens. So for what follows, what I like to be able to do is really just to show you the difference between a monolingual reading of a multilingual text and a multilingual reading of a multilingual text. And in this case, I will use the shadow theater as an example. But also I need shadow theater for two reasons. One, it can be multilingual, its history is multilingual, and second, its language is multilingual in the two ways that I just spoke about. But also, more importantly, it's the shadow, and I'm going to come to that in a second. All right, and I will use for my example, right, the 19th century or turn of the 20th century Arabic print culture, focusing on one particular magazine, which is huge, as my example. And this is really just one of the cover pages of magazine. All right. Do I sort of like, if in the interest of time, maybe what I could do is really assume that we all know what shadow theater is, right? And this is khayal al-dhil in Arabic. This is one form of it, right? This is one form. It's cut out leather puppets or real puppets, right? And shadow theater originated either in China or India, and it spread around the world into Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Europe. And today, we see it in multiple forms, shadow theater or puppet theater. These are examples. And it arrived in Arabic in around the sort of like 13th, 14th centuries through a person by the name of Ibn Daniel, who left us 3 plays in writing. So he was born in Iraq, but he became famous in Egypt, right? And in Egypt, he's in Egypt, and it's the beginning of satire, and in classical Arabic, his shadow theater overlaps with an earlier genre of Arabic writing called the maqamat. And I want to sort of like use a page from the maqamat to show you that language and visuals and pictures have always been part and parcel of Arabic manuscripts. So today, right, it's very famous in the Arab world, in Taiwan. I just came from a visit to a sort of shadow puppet theater museum in Taipei. And what you see is really the early, it takes the form of our theater today, very quickly, right? And it's popular, right, at these carnivals in celebration of Muhammad's, birthday, right? And one of the most famous works around that Araguz or Qaraquz puppet theater in Egypt is a film starring Omar al-Sharif, in which he plays a puppet master. And of course, right, the content of the film is a political satire of current Egyptian affairs. So this satire. But what I want to be able to do is use the screen, right, that sort of divides between the performers. And here, what you could see is 3 people performing behind the screen, and on the other side of the screen, what you see is something else, right? So I want to use that to get from, right, what we see on the surface to what is behind the surface. So now, let me give you an example of, I think I'm skipped this part. So this is Jacob Sanois, right? Give you an example of a monolingual reading of Jacob Sanois, right? The father of Egyptian theater, but also the founder and editor of a magazine, Abu Naddara, which is the focus of my discussion, right, which was published between 1977 and 1978, sort of like here, yeah, sorry, 1970s, right, sort of like in Cairo, and it was banned by the sort of the government, Khedive al-Ismail, and then he moved to Cairo and published it, sorry, not Cairo, Paris, and he continued to publish his newspaper, right, between 1978 and 1910, right? And as you will see, it's multilingual and it combines word with image. So let me sort of like read you, right? This is what is the most recent about his work. So this is an example of monolingual and national reading of Sanwa. Sanwa is a national hero, according to Elaine Ursula Ettmüller. In the view, he was an Egyptian Jew who made his mark as an architect of Egyptian nationalism and cultural literary modernization before the current racialized, sectarianized, and nationalized discourses would begin to downplay and dismiss his achievements and contributions. Seen in the history of the 19th century, Arab Nahda, a word usually translated into English as Renaissance or awakening, this polyglot writing in Arabic, English, French, Hebrew, Italian, Persian, and Turkish was pioneering as journalist, nationalist activist, and playwright. In fact, many would consider him the father of Egyptian theater. Ettmüller, who located, collected, digitized, and made available most of the issues of Abu Nadara, that's the title of a newspaper, Sanwa published in Alexandria and Paris between 1978 and 1919, which is now housed in the University of Heidelberg, understandably focuses on Sanwa's contribution to Egyptian nationalism and the role of his journalism in fashioning Egyptian selfhood in the era of European imperialism and colonization of Egypt. Egypt was at the time under the British rule. Like most of the works focused on and informed by the works of a single author, this, in many ways, pioneering study of Sanwa, and the title of the book is The Construct of Egypt's National Self in James Sanwa's satire and caricature, homes in on the emergence of national consciousness and tastes the heterographia of Sanwa's text, equally populated by classical Fusha Arabic, colloquial Egyptian and French, together with caricatures as a sign of increasing nationalization of Egyptian subjects. Newspapers and magazines, caricatures, theatrical plays are all deployed to express and propagate this new Egyptianness, and above all, to call all Egyptians to revolution. More particularly, and with reference to the transformation of Arabic literature from classical modern, newspapers and magazines are seen simultaneously as the site on and public sphere in which modern literary sensibilities, aesthetics, and even genres were born, nurtured, and brought into maturity. This is an important part, but not the whole story of the exuberant 19th century Arabic print culture can tell us about the emergence and maturation of modern Arabic literature and the cultural rejuvenation that serve as its historical, political, and social context. In fact, it is rather reductive, for it extracts from the messy 19th century Arabic print culture and from its context of the multicultural encounters between Europe and the Arab world and between the past and present, a neatly constructed nationalist discourse that is seen to have fashioned a homogeneous national consciousness starting from Egypt and proliferating out into the entire Arab world. This reading of word and image separately with focus on what each says, not how it says it, and each through a monolingual lens obscures from view Sanwa's creative fashioning of a new language, a new literary form, and a new cultural institution from mixing languages familiar to him. I now turn to the multilingualism of the triad of Arabic sphere, public sphere, literary text and language, to consider literary creativity in the context of network circulation, not only of translated text or a literary genre, but also of ideas, people, and things. These travel across multiple overlapping trajectories which converge at and radiate out of multiple cosmopolitan centers. These cosmopolitan centers, in fact, multilingual hubs of the 19th century networks of circulation, were located in the interstices of overlapping empires, knowledge traditions, and languages. If we look at Abu Nadara as integral to the multilingual global public sphere, where modernization and a host of attendant issues are expressed, discussed, and debated, we will see that multilingualism thrives and takes a shape in culture encounters, in lingual mixing, and in conceptual blending here of political ideology as well as scientific developments and new technologies. It reconfigures the textures of language, gives birth to new literary form, and at the same time anticipate a multilingual reception, right? But we have been doing it monolingually. Let us zoom in, right, on Sanwa's wordplay and start with the idea of spectacle. You can see that, glasses or eyeglasses. Nadara in Abu Nadara, man wearing spectacles, is pronounced in the Upper Egyptian colloquial register. In the classical register, it's Nadara. It is also known as Abu Nadara Zarqa, man wearing blue spectacles, as well as a Nadarat al-Masriya, Egyptian spectacle. It is a material object that comes with a set of scientific underpinnings about sight, perspective, and vision. Through this shape-shifting spectacle, we can reread the privately funded Abu Nadara's nationalist ideology and lingual and literary revolution against the backdrop of the spectacular, another meaning of Nadara, splendor, radiance, or bloom, cultural discourses produced in a new vision, spectacle, and performed on the pages of Abu Nadara, now transformed into a theater spatially and stylistically to a class of new educated spectators, the new Egyptian nationals. So I link these ideas surrounding the spectacle to multilingualism of the journal itself, right? So I'm going to read this and then show you, substantiate these with some slides, and I hope someone will wave at me, like when I reach about 30 minutes, and I can conclude, hopefully very quickly as well. So Abu Nadara, do I have it? Okay. So Abu Nadara is audibly, visibly, and palpably multilingual, lingually, semiotically, and disciplinarily, right, or generically. On its page, Arabic is heteroglossic. Various languages based in word are brought into conversation, and word, image, sound, and performance are combined in one package. It writes in classical Arabic, Egyptian colloquial, and French, combines word with image, sound, and the human body in motion, and blends science and technology with storytelling and performance. Multilingualism in Abu Nadara is, however, unique. Instead of Arabic, Persian, and Turkish of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 19th century, and Arabic and Spanish of the Maghreb and the Western Mediterranean in the 18th century, Abu Nadara writes in classical Arabic, colloquial Egyptian, and French. Image in the form of caricatures visualize the ideas expressed and the stories told, and point to the relevance of sound and body language in comprehending the word. This final or eventual exuberant multilingualism in Abu Nadara was the outcome of a journey of multiplying the trajectory of which multiplication, the trajectory of which becomes clear only from the perspective of hindsight. The Abu Nadara collection began bilingually in classical Arabic and colloquial Egyptian, interspersed with French and caricature here in black and white, and ended with full bilingualism with equal distribution of classical Arabic and colloquial Egyptian on one side and French on the other. In fact, the Arabic content is re-rendered fully in French. Similarly, the caricatures now appear in a greater number and occupy a larger space, right? And you can see this. What I'm going to do is just show you very quickly, but I won't have time to explain carefully, right? So this is 1870, travels in Paris in terms of genre, title, Jarida, newspaper, and you can see mainly Arabic, right? Abu Nadara in 1880, right? Visual stuff. Abu Zammara, flutist or clarinetist, 18 Abu Safara, flutist, I think. Abu Nadara again, and we move from black and white to sort of color, and what you see is the increasing sort of like occupation space for French. Sorry, right? Here is, okay, so I can't, okay, great. But I can't, that's too small, all right? Abu Nadar, 1910, right? And you can see the full pages, the development of the sort of configuration, that what the different names, right? Muslim world, right? And finally, right, this one is 1910, which is the last one. What you see is the appearance of Abu Nadara on the top of the page, one in Egyptian dress and the other in European dress, right? So you can see the sort of there's a parallel movement of these of the two languages, right? So I think what I'm going. So these titles and the pages characterize the role of newspaper and its founder and editor play in the Arabic public sphere, a man looking at and seeing Egypt and the world from Egyptian perspective, who represents the political. No, I think I'm okay. All right, thank you. I hope this is waking us up so that we don't need more coffee. Where was I? So let me reread this. So these titles characterize the role of newspapers and founder and editor play in the Arabic public sphere, a man looking at and seeing Egypt and the world from the Egyptian perspective, who represents the political and social conditions in Egypt to both Arabic and French readers, and speak for the Egyptian aspirations to see justice at home and a fairer understanding of the Muslim world in Europe, right? The Egyptian man is identified as the fallah, peasant, who in his travel in Cairo and Paris encounters the Egyptian ruling class and comes to realize that tyranny and corruption through French ideas. The two European music instruments, the clarinet and the flute, give a sense of the presence of Europe in Abu Nadara and the importance of voice and sounding the voice. Sound, like image, is an integral part of the language in Abu Nadara. Both contribute to meaning and complement what word conveys. In fact, the two Arabic terms, saffara and zammara, from saffara to whistle and zammara to blow, can refer to Middle Eastern wind instruments. It is their visualization that takes us to European clarinet and flute. The fluidity of meaning of words follows in the footsteps of the mobility of things and concepts around the Mediterranean, made possible by the technologies that facilitated their movements. The immediately identifiable vehicle is clearly the people who travel. The Egyptian peasant in Abu Nadara arguably personifies Sanwa himself, whose multilingualisms and travels around the Mediterranean enabled and encouraged lingual, conceptual, and cultural blending of all kinds in his mind and expression. Like things, ideas, and languages can travel on their own without the traveling people. Abu Nadara, just to name one example, which carries ideas and languages on its pages, travels from Paris to the Arab world and spreads them around, fostering even more intercultural encounters and exchanges. Technology that made possible its production also facilitated its circulation and reception. So I'm going to here, right, just show you, so I'm supposed to be here, all right? Right, technology of writing, so that if you think about the production of these newspapers and circulation of this newspaper over a period of more than 20 years maybe, right? Newspaper, and I showed this one because adjacently, as we'll come to the sciences, right, you need the this is the publication that started in 1877 that introduces European science and technology, but also related them to Arabic and Islamic sciences from the past, right? Paper, and then print culture, paper making, printing presses, and printing presses, Arabic printing presses started in Europe, right, in the 15th century, and spread to the Middle East in the 18th century. It also involved optics, seeing, which is traceable to Ibn Haytham in Arabic and his tradition, right? And English, sort of Latin translation, and then later European translation. And it tells us that we see, when we see, right, it involves reflection of the light, right? And these are, images are sort of like, things, boxes, right, about seeing that will link sort of what he's doing to sort of puppet theater or shadow theater. These just examples and this is sort of a magic lantern that was carried out to show these illusions, right, of light and play. And of course, when we talk about circulation, we need the postal service, post office, cargo ship. Thankfully, we're talking about the 19th century, not 21st century. Train, van, bicycle, postman, and so on and so forth. So all these come into play to give Abu Nadara its the fabric of its language and text, right? And here, right, just to give an example, right, the Arabic language comes to be inhabited by French language through process of conceptual blending by which the slogans of the French Revolution, solidarity, fraternity, liberty, albeit with a twist, comes to be an integral part of Arabic language and of Arabic national discourses. Conceptual blending of this kind takes place through lingual blending when two languages, including the inherent concepts and thought patterns, come together in one language. Arabic and French blend in Sanwa's Arabic, right? This is the creative energy that fuels the development in language ideology, transforms the configuration of multilingualism inherent in a language, in this case Arabic, and gives rise to a new literary form and style here in the form of theater, right? The spectacle encapsulates this creativity. It is at once tangible materially and symbolic. We have a physical sense of what it is. It is representable visually. In fact, its drawings adorn the visual scape of the newspaper, and it is generative of various significations. It is a material thing. It is symbolic of science and technology. It conjures up association with eyes, sight, and vision. It denotes the positions and perspectives of seeing, and it informs the comprehension and representation of what is seen. So play with light, shadow, and seeing ensues, right? Seeing is tricky, as the articles on optics in the 1870 issue shows how, for the eye, al-ayn is often tricked by the ways in which light affects sight, vision, and seeing. Khid'at al-ayn, right? What one sees may not correspond to reality, for in addition to the mechanism of seeing, it is affected by the vantage point and perspective from which one sees. The nitty-gritty quotidian detail of Egyptian life are dramatized and satirized from the perspectives of common folk. These focus on the two main intertwined issues, nationalism and liberty. Both Sanwa loves equally, حبنا في الوطن وفي الحرية, liberty in all forms, political, religious, financial, and social is tackled, but local politics, what he calls enslavement, al-ubudiyya, concerns him the most, which comes in the form of tyranny, corruption, and injustice, and collaboration with the foreign powers who have self-serving ambitions in Egypt. The figure of the local leader, Sheikh al-Hara, is the subject of his intervention in how Egyptian ruling classes would be viewed and portrayed. He is the anti-hero of the story of Egypt. Sanwa tells on the pages of Abu Nadara through the lens of exile and from the vantage point of Paris. So what you will see here, like I'm going to show some slides. What you see is the integration of puppet theater with cinema, with space, this theater house. This is the Cairo Opera House, right? And cinema, framing, movement of image, right? And panorama, right? And also the exhibition that Abu Nadara visited in Paris in 1890. Sorry, that was the wrong date. So what we can conclude is that Sanwa, sort of the two things, right? The quality of his language and of his style of representation, which embeds sight and sound of the live language, may best be captured by the word theatricality, where it overlaps with image and sound. This is especially obvious in Abu Nadara. On its pages, caricatures in the early issues, as I have mentioned, and photographs in the later ones help to recreate the experience of language at work, more particularly of language on stage and in performance. Sanwa seems to have recreated the theater Ismail Pasha shut down on the pages of Abu Nadara. The theater in his newspaper taps into the languages in which live plays are performed, the various dramatic genres popular at the time, the architecture of the theater, the acoustics and sound effect, and the positionality of the actors and their audience. But this virtual theater is infinitely more expansive. For now, the word is its stage, and its cast and audience includes all those in power, with focus on British Egyptians and French and the entire peoples they rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your passionate and insightful lecture, and you will have about 10 minutes or so to raise a question. And if you have question, raise your hands and wait for the microphone.
Does it work? Okay. So my name is Tomasz Ebeltowski, and thank you very much for this insightful talk, which shows this multilingual and even I would call it multi-material dimension of literature. And I would like to ask a question: what advice you can offer to scholars who run into such a situation, that they find out that to properly analyze a literary phenomenon, they would need languages they don't speak and technical knowledge they don't have, because sometimes our inquiries can take us far away from our area of expertise. And what would you suggest to do in such a situation? Thank you.
Oh, God, goodness. God, this is a really, really tough question, right? And it's relevant to where we are in terms of a career and what we can afford to do in order to digress everywhere, in order to come back to what we initially planned, right? So I think it's sort of like early career researchers, especially I consider myself a late career researcher, will have to be mindful about their career progression, and they might want to sort of focus and in terms of publication until they get to a place where they can do what I can afford to do. And this reminds me of the sort of advice Professor C.T. Shah gave me when I was a doctoral student. Nobody can supervise what you want to do. There are no career opportunities to focus either on Chinese or Arabic, and when you become a professor, you can do whatever you want to do. So I started this project after I became a professor. So, but it doesn't mean that, you know, because as we do our research, we find these questions, seeds, niggling seeds about what we're doing, the methods of our research, and then don't give up on them. Keep them until you have room to explore them more fully. There's a question there.
Hello, Wenjin. It's Yuriko.
Yeah.
I'm Yuriko Yamanaka from the National Museum of Ethnology. I have a little bit of a specific question. I really learned a lot about this, the key figure in the modernization of Egyptian Arabic theater, the Sanwa. And I was wondering how much of a traditional popular folk theater has influenced it, or how much he inherited from it in terms of style and themes. Has he read, for example, has he been influenced by Ibn Danyal, 13th century Cairene shadow playwright, who was actually also an oculist? So I was wondering whether the spectacles was a little bit of an homage to Ibn Danyal.
Yeah.
And also, so was the edition read, like a kind of a published version of Ibn Danyal available at that time? And also, has these kind of very popular folk shadow plays, would Sanwa have watched these things in the streets of Cairo? Was it still alive? And, you know, so how much, or is he just really elitist? You know, I studied in the West and I know French, and I am importing Western theater. So how much of this kind of incorporating very, very popular, sometimes very crude Arabic language, you know, very live audience play, shadow interaction type of traditional folk plays, how much was that taken into his plays? Thank you.
It's sort of like, I think Ibn Danyal was, in a sense, he's always been there, but he was rediscovered after Yaqub Sanwa's time. So let me sort of also state something, right? So this is about the problem of nationalization. Yaqub Sanwa today in Arabic is dismissed, right? Because he is of Jewish origin, and since the establishment of the State of Israel, everybody sort of dismisses him as one of the architects of Arab modernization. But the puppet theater, is Araguz and Qaraquz, has been very popular throughout history, possibly before Ibn Danyal. I think that was his source. The other source, of course, was the contemporary theater of his time, which was sort of like originated with the Syro-Lebanese, right, the Qabbanis, who blended, right, storytelling with music, right, and that was very influential in his work. And of course, right, he was also the recipients of sort of European opera houses, European theater, and so on. And he traveled. But his sources, even in terms of European theater and plays, his sources were more like the popular sort of performances in the streets to which he was exposed, right? He traveled around the Mediterranean. So, but I think is really and this is one of the problems of research. We have these long, hundreds of years or thousands of years of popular tradition of performance, Al-Aragu, Sanduq al-Dunya, these all come together, but we don't have historical records or written records of them. So we don't know the text. But if you read, sort of like, if you compare, for example, I have a Syrian version from the early 20th century, right? If you compare, it's usually Judy and Punch, two characters, compare the sort of language with the languages that were reproduced in the 19th century print culture, including Abu Nadara, they're exactly the same. So there's nothing exciting about these sketches or dialogues. They are satire of social conditions, political conditions, and if you spend a lot of time reading Abu Nadara, you can see how huge it is. You find it repetitive, right? But it's the language, and the language is we can describe it as vulgar, right? Vulgar, debauch, right? Loud, uncouth, right? Rude, and that works much more in the context of what Bakhtin calls the carnival or carnivalesque, right? So if that makes sense in a nutshell.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm Marikit from the Philippines, and I see you as a multilingual activist. For me, it was very enlightening. In the Philippines, there is now a trend towards diasporic literature, shifting towards multilingualism, wherein it used to be more monolingual. It used to be you have to use American English and all that, and now they're really using a plethora of languages. Would you say, and Gina Apostol is one of those people who have won awards because of this, would you say the global north is now more receptive to the multilingual lens? And why do you think there has been this change? And just in context, your answer would actually have an impact because in language and literature classrooms in the Philippines, literature is taught and language is taught using a monolingual lens. So they haven't caught on to the multilingual lens either. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I feel very privileged because I live in London, and London multilingualism is welcome. And I think in the world I inhabit, and I'm very privileged, whether I think of North America or Northern Europe or Western Europe and even Eastern Europe, multilingualism is in practice and it's very much alive. I think the issue I have is really not practice itself, not the living multilingualism, but how we critically filter that multilingualism and look at multilingualism, right? And one of the issues I've been struggling with is really how our critical lens remains monolingual. So this is really the challenge. It's not it's not like London does not welcome multilingualism or Europe does not, or sort of like America does not. It's not about that. It's really how we do, how do we theorize multilingually, right? So that those our critical reflections reflect the multilingualism of the practices. I hope that answers your questions. And I hope we move towards much more multilingual sort of approach to multilingual work, or even monolingual works. If there is such a thing as monolingual work, I don't know.
Yes, probably one more last question is available.
First of all, thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. And my question is more about the future, because I feel like you've talked a lot about the continuous entanglement, the continuous clashing of different cultures and language systems. And do you think this type of encounter would lead to sort of like a flattening or homogenization of languages in terms that they will become more transparent in the future and they will sort of like lose their distinguishedness, or do you think they will go to the opposite side? An example is that I also do like performance studies, but I'm like more rooted in like dance performances. But now I feel like in quote dance performances, the proportion of body language or choreography is declining a lot, and it's becoming something like, I don't know if it's dance or not. So yeah, do you think the same thing will happen in all types of art? Thank you very much.
Okay, God. So I sort of like, I'm going to preface what I say by saying that I'm interested more sort of in the past, before 19th century and before the modern period. And sort of my mission has been to highlight the multilingualisms, right? That we all think in many tongues, right? Like, like at least from where I come from, the Middle East, many times. And I wanted to be able to highlight that instead of nationalizing classical Arabic literature, nationalizing classical Persian literature, Chinese literature, so on and so forth. But from engaging with that and thinking about that in the context of my living conditions, I see that I don't see sort of homogenization. What I see is, I use this word, configuration of multilingualism, right? But these configurations change from time to time, from location to locations. So I'm very optimistic that that will not change, right? So I'm keen, right, to retain the idea of language difference, because language is not just communication, but it's also our epistemology and ontology. And I like that. I like sort of distinctions. I like differences, right? So I don't think we'll get to a place where we all become homogenized, mainly because even within multilingualism, we have different configurations dependent on where you are.
Yes, always time is trouble. I know that many of you have additional questions, but we have a schedule, so we will close the discussion here. And if you have any more questions, please use the break time if our speaker allows. Yes. And please join me in applauding Professor Wang. Thank you so much.